It started on the first cold week of December, the kind where you can see your breath and smell wood smoke drifting from chimneys. My wife, Emily, and I had just finished unpacking the last box in our new home, a Wamiora meets quiet cul-de-sac in Maplewood. Estates, a neighborhood run by an HOA that bragged about being the most organized community in the county. I should have known that. Phrase was code for we control everything. Still, we were excited. This was our first real house, a place where we could start our holiday traditions. Emily loved Christmas lights, the kind that glow so bright they could guide. Santa from space. We'd spent months designing our display. Synchronized lights, soft music, a glowing archway, and a handmade sleigh on the lawn. But the day after I strung up the first row of twinkling bulbs, a white envelope appeared on our door. Notice of violation. My stomach dropped. According to the HOA, our lights disrupted the neighborhood's visual harmony and had to be taken down within 24 hours. At first I laughed. I figured it was a misunderstanding. Maybe the president of the HOA, a woman named Diana Crow, just didn't know we were new. So I went to the next HOA meeting, letter in hand. The community hall was packed with neighbors sitting in metal chairs, murmuring about decorations and dues. Diana sat at the front, tall and stiff, her hair twisted into a bun that looked like it could cut glass. When I explained that my lights weren't even fully up yet, she didn't blink. "We have strict guidelines," she said, tapping her clipboard. "White lights only. No music, no inflatables. It's to maintain uniformity." I glanced around. Everyone else nodded like obedient sheep. But then I saw an older man at the back smirk quietly. That was the first time I realized not everyone in Maplewood agreed with her. I tried reasoning with her. I even offered to tone it down. But she leaned forward, lowering her voice like she was delivering a warning. "This isn't a carnival, Mr. Turner. If you can't follow the rules..." "Maybe you bought in the wrong place." The room went silent. I felt heat rush to my face. She moved on to the next topic like I didn't exist. When I got home, Emily was sitting on the porch steps, the lights half hung, her hands cold and still. "What did they say?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. I looked at our dark house, at the empty hooks and quiet street. Then I said, "They said no, but I'm not done yet." That night, I took down the lights, but not because I gave up. I was planning something bigger, something that would make sure Diana and the HOA never forgot my name again. Over the next few days, I watched the neighborhood like a detective studying a crime scene. Every house looked identical, white roofs, beige siding, matching shrubs, and the same bland white Christmas lights. It was eerie, like someone had copy-pasted every home from a magazine. Even at night, the street looked like a dull row of clones. But I noticed something interesting. A few houses had quiet rebellions. The old man from the meeting, Mr. Jacobs, had a tiny red wreath hanging behind his curtains, technically invisible from the street, but still a small act of defiance. A woman down the block had colored lights twisted around her back porch, just enough to be hidden from the HOA patrols. That's when it hit me. People weren't obeying the HOA because they liked it. They obeyed because they were afraid. And fear could be broken. I started small. I reinstalled my lights, but only along the roofline, all white this time. I followed every rule to the letter. The next day, no letter, so I added another row along the garage, then the driveway, then around the windows. Each step stayed within regulation limits. But one night, while Emily and I were sipping cocoa, we saw Diana's black Lexus crawl slowly past the house. She stopped, stared, then drove off without rolling her window down. The next morning, another envelope appeared. Too bright. Remove immediately. No loss cited, no explanation. Just a demand. That's when I decided this was no longer about Christmas lights. It was about control. I called a few neighbors and invited them over that weekend. To my surprise, half a dozen showed up, including Mr. Jacobs. We sat in the garage surrounded by boxes of lights and tools, the cold air smelling faintly of pine and rebellion. "She fined me last year for having a snowman on my porch," said one woman, shaking her head. "It wasn't even inflatable," another man added. "She made me take down my wreath because it had red berries," said it looked too pagan. The more they talked, the clearer it became. Diana wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She was feeding her ego. I showed them my plan, a synchronized lighting system that connected to smart timers hidden from view. "We'll light up together," I said. One house after another, all at once. They looked at me like I was crazy. But Mr. Jacobs grinned. "Son, if this works, you'll make history." For the next week, we worked in secret. Every night, after Diana's patrol rounds ended, we hung lights, ran extension cords, and synchronized timers. The system was rigged to go live on Christmas Eve at exactly 8 p.m. sharp. Emily was nervous. What if they fine us or worse? I kissed her forehead and whispered, "Then we'll make the fine worth it." By December 23rd, the neighborhood looked normal from the street. Plain, quiet, compliant. But behind every fence, behind every curtain, lay a secret web of wires ready to ignite in color. I thought I had everything under control until that evening, when I got a knock at the door. It was Diana. Her lipstick was sharp, her voice even sharper. "I've received reports of unauthorized decorations," she said. "Mind if I take a look around?" My heart pounded. "Not without a warrant," I replied calmly. She smirked. "You forget, this is HOA property." "No," I said, stepping forward. "This is my property." She stared at me for a long moment, then handed me a paper. "Final notice. One more violation and you'll face a 1,000 fine and possible lien." She turned and walked off, heels crunching on the cold pavement. When the door shut, Emily looked terrified, but I smiled. She just guaranteed that tomorrow will be unforgettable. Christmas Eve arrived with the kind of stillness that made every sound echo. The snow had started falling early in the morning, a soft white blanket that made Maplewood. Estates looked like something out of a postcard. Pure, quiet, perfect. Too perfect. By sunset, the streets were empty, the houses dim, and the only sound was the crunch of my boots as I walked down the driveway. Everything was ready. The wires were hidden, the timers were synced, and every house that had joined the plan was standing by. I could see faint silhouettes behind curtains, nervous neighbors, waiting for the moment we'd all been planning. Emily stood beside me, gloved hand gripping mine, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement. "You're sure about this?" she whispered. I nodded. "It's too late to back out now." At exactly 7:59 p.m., the street was dead silent. Even the air felt like it was holding its breath. Across the street, I could see Diana's house glowing faintly with her regulation-approved white icicle lights. Neat, cold, sterile. She was probably inside sipping cocoa and feeling smug, certain she had scared everyone into submission. But when my phone clock hit 8 ASYN, I pressed the button on my remote, and the world exploded in color. The first house to light up was mine, bright red, green, and gold lights blazing across every inch of the siding, synchronized to Carol of the Bells. A second later, Mr. Jacob's house flickered to life, his entire front yard glowing blue and silver. Then another house joined in, and another, until the entire street looked like a living river of light and color. Snow reflected every flash, every shimmer. The synchronized music echoed down the cul-de-sac as the snowflakes danced in rhythm. Then I saw her curtains move. Diana stepped out onto her porch, eyes wide, jaw hanging open as if she'd just seen the apocalypse. What is this?" she shouted, but her voice was drowned out by the music. She ran back inside, and seconds later her Lexus headlights cut through the snow as she sped toward my driveway, horn blaring. She slammed on the brakes and jumped out, waving a folder of papers in the air. "You're in violation! All of you!" she screamed, her voice shrill against the music. "This is not allowed! Turn them off!" But nobody moved. The neighbors stood outside their homes now, watching her melt down like it was part of the show. Even the kids, bundled up in scarves and mittens, laughed and clapped to the beat. For the first time since moving in, the street wasn't silent. It was alive. Diana stomped up my driveway, but I stepped forward before she reached the porch. "You said white lights only," I said calmly. "So, I made sure the timers run for just 5 minutes. After that, they'll turn off automatically. Technically not a violation." Her face went red, then purple. "You think you're clever?" she hissed. "You think this makes you a hero?" I leaned closer and whispered, "No, it makes me free." Before she could respond, a loud cheer erupted as the lights hit their finale, every color pulsing in perfect harmony, casting her shadow 20 feet tall against her garage door. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything went dark. The timers clicked off, leaving the neighborhood glowing faintly. From the afterimage burned into everyone's eyes. Silence returned, except for the soft sound of applause. Diana stood frozen, chest heaving, completely humiliated. She looked around, realizing that every neighbor was smiling. Not at me, but at each other. They weren't afraid anymore. That was the real victory. She turned sharply and stormed back to her car. tires screeching as she sped away into the night. Emily threw her arms around me laughing, tears in her eyes. "I can't believe you did that," I smiled, heart pounding. "Oh, we're just getting started," because what Diana didn't know was that this show had been recorded. Every second of it, every shout, every meltdown, all caught on the security cameras I'd installed weeks before. And I already knew exactly what I was going to do with that footage. By Christmas morning, the video had already been uploaded. I didn't post it under my name. I used a community page called Maplewood Neighbors Uncensored, which I'd quietly created a few weeks earlier, just in case. I titled the clip, "HOA President Loses It Over Christmas Lights, Instant Karma," and attached the footage from my cameras. Diana storming up my driveway, yelling, the synchronized light show in full glory, and the neighbors cheering while she melted down in the snow. I went to bed with only 10 views. By the time I woke up, it had 300,000. My phone buzzed nonstop. Comments flooded in from people all over the country. "This is why I hate HOAs. That guy's a legend. Give him the neighborhood crown." The video spread to local Facebook groups, then Reddit, then YouTube, and by the afternoon, local news vans were parked outside the cul-de-sac. I peeked through the blinds to see a reporter setting up a camera on the sidewalk. Emily looked both terrified and thrilled. "What if she finds out it was you?" she whispered. I grinned. She already has. At noon, the HOA sent out a community-wide emergency notice via email. It was signed by Diana herself. Unauthorized video recordings and public defamation of HOA members will result in immediate disciplinary action. Within an hour, another email followed from one of the board members. Due to recent events, an emergency meeting has been scheduled. The tone was desperate. That's when the real fireworks began. Neighbors who had been silent for years suddenly started replying to the HOA thread. Maybe the board should explain why they fine us for harmless decorations. You call this community spirit? I think we need new leadership. The thread exploded into chaos. Diana tried to silence them, warning that all further communication must be approved through proper channels. But the dam had broken. People weren't afraid anymore. That evening, when the news crew knocked on my door, I didn't hide. I stepped outside, still in my Christmas sweater, and told the truth. How we'd been fined for decorations. How Diana enforced rules that didn't even exist. How we just wanted to celebrate without fear. The clip aired that night, and by the next morning, it wasn't just a local story. It had gone national. My phone pinged with messages from people in other states sharing their own HOA horror stories. Even a late-night host joked about the guy who lit up his HOA's hypocrisy better than his house. But for Diana, things were different. She stopped driving her Lexus. The HOA office door stayed locked. Rumors spread that several board members had resigned. And then one evening, as the snow began to melt and the holiday lights slowly came down, a plain envelope appeared in my mailbox. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No letterhead, no signature. Just 3 words written in angry, shaky handwriting. "You'll regret this." Emily's face went pale when she saw it. "She wouldn't. She can't do anything, right?" she asked. I wanted to reassure her, but something about those words made the air feel heavier. Because deep down, I knew Diana wasn't the kind of person to go quietly. And sure enough, a few days later, strange things began happening. My mailbox was knocked over twice in 1 week. A small scratch appeared across the hood of my truck. And one morning, I found a dead string of Christmas lights neatly coiled on my porch like a warning. Whoever left it wanted me to know that the fight wasn't over. But neither was I. The new year came, but peace didn't. Every morning, I woke up wondering what I'd find next. Mud splashed across the garage door. Broken ornaments scattered on the lawn. The faint feeling that someone had been there during the night. Emily grew tense, jumping at every creak of the floorboards. I told her I'd handle it, but truthfully, even I started to feel uneasy. That's when I decided to dig deeper. If Diana wanted a war, I was going to find out exactly what kind of queen she was pretending to be. I began by looking through the HOA's public records, minutes of meetings, expenditure reports, and archived complaints. Most of it was mundane, but a few things stood out. Missing receipts, vague maintenance fees, and payments made to a company called Crow Landscaping Services. That name hit me like a hammer. Crow, Diana's last name. I cross-checked it online, and sure enough, it was registered to her brother. The HOA had been funneling community money into her family's business for years, disguised as neighborhood beautification projects. I printed everything and took it straight to Mr. Jacobs. He whistled low. shaking his head. "I always knew she was crooked," he said. "But this is theft." We brought a few trusted neighbors into the loop and spent hours piecing together the evidence. It was all there. Bank statements, dates, even board signatures that looked suspiciously identical. Diana had been running her HOA like a private kingdom, collecting dues and quietly enriching herself. But exposing her wouldn't be easy. She still had loyalists, board members who owed her favors, neighbors who feared her temper. And if I went public again, without proof solid enough to hold up, she'd twist it against me. So I did what she'd never expect. I played by the rules. At the next HOA meeting, I showed up early, wearing my nicest jacket, holding a folder full of documents. The room was packed. Word of the viral video had turned these meetings into community theater. When Diana walked in, her eyes locked on me, cold and sharp. "Mr. Turner," she said slowly, "I assume you're here to issue an apology for your spectacle." "Actually," I said, standing up, "I'm here to talk about your landscaping invoices." The room went silent. I began reading aloud, amounts, dates, and signatures. Whispers rippled through the crowd as people realized what they were hearing. Diana's smile cracked, but she tried to recover. "Those are routine expenses," she said firmly. "All approved by the board." "That's the thing," I said, holding up a page. "These signatures? They all match yours." I placed 3 sheets side by side on the table. Even from a distance, it was obvious. The handwriting was identical. Someone gasped. Diana's composure broke. "You have no right to—" "Actually, every homeowner here does," I cut in. "You've been using our money to pay your family's company." "That's embezzlement, Diana." The room erupted. Neighbors shouted, cameras flashed, and someone yelled, "Call the police!" She tried to talk over them, her voice cracking, but no one was listening anymore. In that moment, the power she'd built through fear collapsed like a house of cards. That night, an emergency vote was called. For the first time in the history of Maplewood Estates, the HOA board voted unanimously to remove its president. Diana was done. But the story didn't end there. A week later, I came home to find my front door slightly open. Nothing was stolen, but a single item was left on the kitchen counter. A snow globe, cracked down the middle. Inside it, the tiny plastic house's lights were dead. Emily wanted to call the police, but I stopped her. I knew what it meant. It was Diana's message, her final warning. Still, I smiled. Because what she didn't realize was that her downfall had only just begun. The local news wasn't done with her, and neither was I. The story of Maplewood's Christmas light scandal didn't fade. It evolved. The local news coverage had stirred something bigger. And when word got out that the HOA president was under investigation for misuse of funds, reporters came back in droves. They wanted interviews, follow-ups, neighborhood reactions. I wasn't chasing fame, but I wasn't hiding either. Every time I spoke, I made sure to emphasize the same thing. This isn't about one bad person. It's about good people being too scared to stand up. The message resonated. HOA reform groups started quoting me. The video climbed past 5 million views. Meanwhile, the county's financial crimes unit began looking at Crow landscaping services. The deeper they dug, the uglier it got. Overbilling. Fake maintenance jobs, even invoices for repairs that never happened. Within weeks, investigators served a warrant on Diana's office. Neighbors gathered at their windows, watching officers carry boxes of files out to waiting cars. For once, the street buzzed with excitement instead of fear. Diana disappeared for a few days after that, and when she returned, the proud posture was gone. She kept her head down, avoided eye contact, and for the first time, her yard lights were off. Rumor said she'd been questioned by police and that her brother had already confessed. Some wanted to celebrate, but I felt only a strange, quiet satisfaction. I hadn't set out to destroy her, just to reclaim some peace. But the truth has its own momentum, once it starts rolling downhill. Still, one thing gnawed at me. Late one night, scrolling through security footage to check for more porch vandalism, I noticed movement near my gate. The timestamp read 2:14 a.m. A figure in a dark coat stood there for nearly a minute, holding something in their hand. A letter, maybe, and then walked away. I went outside the next morning and found nothing but footprints in the frost. The police called it harmless, probably a prank, but I wasn't so sure. Winter bled into spring, and Maplewood began to change. Without Diana's iron grip, neighbors started repainting shutters, planting flowers, even hosting block parties. The place finally looked alive. One evening, as we strung soft white lights along the porch for the next season, Emily leaned against me and said, "You realize you changed this neighborhood forever, right?" I laughed. Maybe, or maybe we just reminded people they already had the power. A week later, a letter arrived, not from Diana, but from the new HOA board. They were officially dissolving most of the old rules and refunding homeowners for misused fees. Tucked inside was a handwritten note. "Thank you for giving us our voice back." I folded it carefully and set it beside the cracked snow globe. I'd kept as a reminder. Months passed. Then one afternoon, a news alert popped up on my phone. Former HOA president sentenced for fraud and embezzlement. The article mentioned probation, fines, and community service. It even quoted her tearful apology in court. I stared at the photo, Diana, humbled, exhausted, unrecognizable, and felt a wave of finality. That night, I turned on the Christmas lights one last time. Even though it wasn't December, they flickered to life across the porch, soft and warm against the dark. Emily laughed, the sound echoing down the street, where other houses began to glow too, one by one, in silent solidarity. As I watched the lights shimmer, I realized something. The fight had never really been about decorations or control. It had been about freedom, the right to shine a little brighter in a world that prefers everything uniform. And in Maplewood Estates, that freedom was now permanent.